I am a predator.
Hello, this is Mike Predator006 with CardRunners.com. Welcome to the video on the top 10 pot limit Omaha 8 or better leaks. Each one of these leaks will be introduced with the top 10 hip-hop songs of all time based on my opinion. We will start at number 10 and work our way up to the number 1 PLO8 leak combined with the number 1 hip-hop song of all time. Coming in at number 10 is Ice Cube, Today It Was a Good Day. And the number 10 PLO8 leak is Playing Aggressively in Early Stages of Sit and Goes. Now this is the first of 2 sit and go leaks that I will talk about throughout this video. And in early stages of sit and goes, we are going to play an extremely tight and weak style. Our goal is to get to phase 2 with 1,500 chips or a little bit more, and this is okay since accumulation's not as important in this game. And I'm not really raising pre-flop, even in position. I'm not 3-betting with really good hands. I'm typically only going to 3-bet if I can get more than half of my stack in and have a stack to pot ratio that is pretty much all in with any flop. And that's hard to do in the early stages. That would take an early position raise, a couple calls, and I would 3-bet the pot with blinds 25-50, and I'll have ace-ace wheel almost every time, and I'll bet any and every flop if somebody called my large 3-bet. So since PLO8's a much more flop dependent game, we are going to limp in with our playable hands, and we're not going to raise, and that's because of the close equity differences between most playable hands. And in no limit hold'em, there's occasions where you're going to be 80-20 pre-flop, and even with a huge hand in PLO8, you're never going to have anywhere near that type of equity, getting all in pre-flop or even raising. So you want to see hands that have the potential to win big pots, but you're just going to limp in and see what the flop is prior to getting extremely involved with pots. And even from lower through even the medium limit sit and goes that typically run, most are turbos, and players in these do make huge mistakes, and they will pay you off when you hit a hand. So we want to play slowly until we know we're getting half, and there's a good chance we'll get 3/4 or be scooping a pot. In these sit and goes, you'll get paid off when you hit. So there's no real reason to be overly aggressive pre-flop when you're at most likely, even with a big hand, you're probably only 55 to 60%. Just wait for the hand to hit and then get paid off when it does. Typical hands that I will limp with in this stage are in the following categories or range. I'm going to be doing it with pretty much any ace-ace, also with most suited aces if they have a 2 or a 3. Any ace wheel and a high pocket pair, any ace 2-3, a lot of ace 3s with 2 Broadway cards, and ace wheels. We can fold bad ace 2s and ace 3s when the blinds get a little bit higher. I'm typically not going to be doing it when the blinds are 15, 30 or anything like that, because I can control myself not to get overly involved if I know that I'm being free rolled or I'm getting quartered. There's ways to minimize the post flop aggression and have some pot control if you see yourself in this type of situation. Typically PLO hands like your high rundowns like King King, Queen Jack, Queen Queen, Jack 10. I'll typically limp with these. It's good to limp with them if the blinds are really low. Any more than that, and we're really spewing our chips in relation to how often these will hit. They're great to play in cash games. In sit and goes, you don't really have the implied odds to play these type of hands. And when I do, I will only play if all four cards are coordinated, being high rundowns like that King King Queen Jack, or maybe a pair of kings with a couple wheel cards, pair of queens with a couple wheel cards. You know, there. I put that there are folds in this stage of sit and goes because if you look at later stages and three-handed and heads up and bubble play, I'm going to be shoving with those type of hands. I look and see that I wrote that there are folds in this stage, but I may limp with these types also. But I'm definitely getting rid of the King King 10 5 hand and the Queen Queen 7 2 hands like that. So if our M ever drops below 7, we kind of move to phase 2 and out of the tight weeks stage of the early sit and goes. And also when we flop the nut low draw, it's more than okay folding if we have no high potential. So if the flop's ace 2 king jack or if we have ace 2 king jack and the flop 6 8 queen and someone bets, we can get rid of that without continuing on in the hand. The number 9 hip hop song of all time is, well, it's my opinion, but Tupac and Dre, California Love. And the number 9 PL08 leak is the second of the two sit and go leaks, which would be lack of aggression in late stages of sit and goes. So when you get deep in a sit and go, three-handed heads up, definitely take advantage of ICM techniques with being aggressive when you're a large stack. There's big differences in styles when the blinds get high, and you want to, especially when heads up, you want to start out aggressive, because if you get somebody who is waiting for a decent hand and they're laying down to your pre-flop raise, you're really going to be able to accumulate chips. And even if you get, if you're even in chips and you build up to be 8,000 to 5,500 and you happen to get in not great shape, you're still going to have much more success by being extremely aggressive in these late stages, building up the chip stack. And you may get in as a 40% with 40% equity instead of 60, but since you accumulated those chips, even if you happen to lose, a lot of times you're going to be splitting the pot, but if you do happen to lose, you still aren't in that bad of shape as if you would be if you didn't play aggressively. When I get heads up and the blinds are, typically 200, 400 in most sit and goes. A lot of times they get up to 300, 600. I push, and I put in parentheses, and I'm willing to call every button with the exception of trips in our hand and totally awful hands like 229 king. If the stacks are extremely similar, like we both have 6,500 chips, somewhere around there, then there is a case for just limping in with maybe a 2 3 5 7 type hand, or a king queen 10 9 type of hand, because if you raise and you get re-raised, I'm never going to be folding to a re-raise once I raise in a sit and go. If I pop it up to 1,800 when it's 300 600 or 2,100, I'll be typically potting, max potting every time. I'm never folding to a 3-bet, but those one-way hands don't play that well to a 3-bet. You need to hit something, and a lot of times you'd be really far behind if you just get it all in with that hand. So if you limp and your opponent has a good hand and raises, you can still call and be able to get away from it if you hit absolutely nothing. And by absolutely nothing, I mean if you have ace, not even ace, say let's you if you have that 2 3 5 7 and the flop is king king jack, we're going to be able to get away from it there. But if you have 2 3 5 7 and the flop is 7 8, well, not just even a pair. I'm going to go with it if I have a pair, because even if you're up against a higher pair, you have backdoor potential for the low as well as potential to hit the two pair. So, it has to be pretty bad to be able to get away from it. And what are we willing to call or three bet with? My range is probably, if somebody raises pre-flop, I'm willing to play for my stack with, the top 33% of the hands if the blinds are high, and probably the top 20% if they're low. So I need something like ace 5, 7, jack maybe to be able to play for my stack if somebody raises pre-flop and in a sit and go in the late stages. Aggression is key, and just keep in mind, even if you have a weaker hand than your opponent, maybe 40% of the time he'll scoop, 30% of the time you'll scoop, and 30% of the time you'll end up splitting for some reason. So, in no limit hold'em, you're either going to typically win or lose, whereas in this game, a lot of times you'll end up scooping or splitting, and so even if you get in a little bit worse, it's not that bad because of the potential for that split to happen. At number 8, we have a little lesser known hip-hop song. It's the Loonies, I Got 5 on it. And the number 8 PLO8 leak is Stealing Blinds. Now, from here on out, everything's going to be cash games. So Stealing Blinds and cash games is number 8. Repeat after me. There's no such thing in PLO8 as stealing blinds. In games where people don't hit flops as often as Omaha, whether it's Omaha high or high low, there's more of a case for raising with lesser holdings. In Hold'em, you may raise with a 9-6 on the button because you have tight players in the blinds. In PLO8, there's an extremely high probability that somebody in the blinds will call if it's ever folded to your button, which it doesn't happen that often, especially if you're playing 9-handed, but if you're playing 6-handed, it will happen a little bit more. And I'm not raising from late position with junk. You're not stealing the blinds. It's not a game where the goal is to steal the blinds. You're only going to be raising with playable hands. Now that range of playable hands could be, any decent ace with a wheel card when it gets into later position. It can be high rundowns. It can be something as if it's folded to me on the button, I may open with something as weak as like a 3-5 Jack King with a suit or something like that. But it's never going to be just to steal. I'm not going to do it with a 8-8-9 King or anything like that. You're not going to have a high steal success rate because there's so many playable hands. And players don't care about position as much in this game as they do in Hold'em. So they're going to be calling with any playable hands, so you don't want to get involved in pots with hands that are junk. Taking number 7 on my hip-hop themed list is Tribe Called Quest featuring Busta Rhymes, Scenario. Notice most of these songs are from from the late 90s, early 90s, a lot of my high school and college years. And the number 7 PL08 leak is only 3-betting aces pre-flop. And surprisingly, a lot of people do this. If I have a significant sample size on a villain and his 3-bet pre-flop 3-bet percentage is 2 to 3, it is so easy to put his range on decent aces. He may as well flip his hand over, and once we know his hand, if we have the implied odds, if we're deep enough, if, as you can see, if the effective stacks are 100 big blinds and we know we have aces, we're going to call with whatever we decided to open with when he 3-bets, because we, against this 2 to 3% player, we know exactly what he has. Now, that's not saying that we have the odds to do it, but we do have the implied odds if we happen to hit 2-pair or a hand that we can be free rolling with. A lot of these hands, good hands to play against this type of player that 3-bets 2 to 3%, include high rundowns and wheel hands, hands with pairs in them, and just essentially hands that a lot of times don't have an ace in them. Even an ace 2-3 would be halfway decent to do this with. It's, if you know what he has and you have any of these hands, if they hit, you're gonna a lot of times be able to stack the 3-better. If the 3-bet player that is in this 2 to 3% range has a shorter stack, if they're 40 big blinds and you raise 3.5 and they repop you, there's no reason to call pre-flop with a speculative type of hand. If I have a ace 2 4 king, ace 2 3 queen type hand, I may be in the mood to play for 30 40 big blinds pre-flop against somebody who may have aces. So I mean, but if they're short, you don't need to be calling with the king queen jack 10 or the king king 10 or the 2 3 5 6 type hands, because you need to have the implied odds. And if we are 100 plus big blinds deep, I will rarely, if ever, fold to a 3-bet, especially from a 2 to 3% player, just because the implied odds and how often the 3-better will overplay his aces post flop. You can check raise anytime you hit 2-pair or better. Even a pair and a flush draw, something like that. I'm going with it against, and a lot of times I'll bet into somebody when I am first to act pre-flop or post-flop with it. When I hit that 1-pair, if I hit 2-pair and there's 2 highs on the board and 1 low, I'll probably check raise. If I hit a pair and a halfway decent low, I may just bet into them, knowing that I most likely have 50% plus equity post-flop, and maybe I could push them off their aces. Number 6, The Far Side, Passing Me By. And everybody, please be glad that I'm not trying to rap or perform these for you, that I'm just putting them on the list and playing them in the background. So The Far Side comes in at number 6, along with the number 6 PL08 leak, which is Limping with High Hands and Rundowns. The hands that I'm talking about look like, typically, a king, queen, jack 9, maybe kings with a couple wheel cards, high pocket pair with coordinating cards, etc. They do not include queen, queen 8-2, Jack Jack 10-5, etc. I did make an entire video on playing these high PLO hands, these high rundown hands. So if you want to check that out in more detail, this is just a basic overview. But the reason, if I can put 3 tips on here, the reason why we need to raise with these type of hands is number 1, and this is first and foremost, we need to balance our raising range where we can continuation bet any flop. So if an opponent knows that we open with our ace-2s, we open with our ace-aces, we open with our queen-queen-jack-10s, no matter what the flop is, if it's 3-5-8, if it's 3-7-king, or if it's queen-jack-8, the opponent is going to, with our raising range being including our whole range here, our high hands and our low hands and our aces, they're not going to know if we're continuation betting with air when those high flops come out, or if we actually have a hand. So I've found that once I introduce these into my raising range rather than limping, I had more success with my continuation bets. Number 2 is when we hit our hand, we want to play for stacks. So if we only limp pre-flop with, let's just say we have the queen-queen-jack-10 and we limp pre-flop, and the flop is 3-6 queen, we want to do our best to be able to get it in on that flop, even versus a random ace-2-6 or something like that, where we don't want to have, a pot. Say we're playing 1-2 and the pot's $6 and we bet $6. Somebody's going to call us with ace-2. We don't want them to call us with ace-2. We want the pot to be raised pre-flop with a couple callers. So the pot is $24 and we have a $200 stack. Then if somebody bets and we check raise them, we're pretty much playing for stacks. And you know if you're going to be a huge favorite. You have a set, you have a wrap, you have a made straight, things like that when you play these hands. And when you raise and we hit our hand, we want to play for stacks rather than giving someone implied odds to continue in the hand to see if they hit their low draw or their flush draw, things like that. Because when we play it aggressively post flop, we're going to be ahead majority of the time. And our opponents rarely put us on this type of hand, especially people that don't pay attention and play with you often. If you're raising with these high hands and rundowns, they don't expect you to have them when the flop is king 9. They'll be more than willing to put it all in with any random king, and you're going to have king 9 in that situation. So, it's good and deceiving, and there's potential to make a lot of money, and you need to be raising with that type of hand rather than just limping in. The number 5 hip-hop song of all time, Snoop Dogg, What's My Name? Number 5 PLO8 League is isolating with one-way nut hands. Going into this, I put an example. If we have queen 3-6 and we raise pre-flop, and the flop is queen 8-6, and we're the second of 3 to act, it's check to us, we bet pot, and 2 people call. The turn's the 3, and we're bet into. You don't want to raise in this situation because there is absolutely no way that the person that bet into you has anything but an ace-2. Maybe they have some type of gut shot or hopefully not a flush draw, But they have ace 2 8, and we want, if we raise, we're going to be chopping the pot every time. There's absolutely no way that somebody's going to take that line without an ace 2, and we don't want to isolate the hand that for sure has the low. When we'll chop the pot, we want to bring the third player in so we can win half of the three-way all-in. Because if there's that much action, then on the river you'll definitely be able to get all in. Should the board not have an apparent straight or flush on it, and you want to suck that third player in and get half of the larger pot rather than split with the guy that for sure has ace 2. And another example, if we have nut low in a three-way hand, we should never really overplay this. You you know, you have most people play almost any ace 2. So in a three-way hand on this type of board, someone's going to have ace 2 a majority of the time if they're willing to continue on in the hand. So you definitely don't want to overplay when you have a nut low, unless you have, you know, maybe nut flush potential. If you have a pair to go with it, you may want to get a little more aggressive. But, you know, if this came out and I was first to act, I'd check call. And a card you would be hoping for, maybe an ace or a 2 even, where you'll have the second nut low with either one of those. You'll be playing your 2-5 if a ace hits, or your ace 5 if a 2 hits. And those are hands that you can, when those counterfeit cards, you can really put a lot of pressure on someone that you believe also has ace 2. So this, you know, we're down to the number 5 PLO8 leak, and I see this a lot of times where people get aggressive with the one-way nuts in multi-way pots with the other person having the other one-way nuts. So it's better to probably play it a little more passively, even if your head's up, and maybe, you know, getting aggressive when a scared card comes on the river. So if you have the nut low and the board pairs on the river, and somebody may have you put them on a straight, or you know, maybe you know, ace 2 was, you know, a pair or something like that. You may want to get aggressive on the river to try to push them off their hand. Not necessarily the ace 2, but if it looks like they may have a flush or a straight, something like that, and the board pairs, or the flush card comes out and then they check into you, you may want to pot it in that situation to try to push them off when you have the one-way nut hand. But that's on the river, and more than likely when it's heads up.
One, two, three, my baby don't mess around.
At number 4, we've got Hey Ya by most likely my favorite hip-hop group, Outkast. And the number 4 PLO8 leak is Bluffing at the Wrong Time. Bluffing at the wrong time. Couple situations I want to look at is the naked ace bluff. Naked ace bluff works well on boards that people aren't going to call you most likely. You know, so your flop is king 9-4 all hearts, and you have the ace of hearts with 3 non-heart cards. This is a good place to bet your naked ace. You're not going to have near as much success with it if you do it on a 3-4-7, because you may have someone with ace 2 with a queen high flush draw who's never going to get out of that hand. So you want to do the naked ace when the opportunity hits that you're going to win the pot if you bet. Also, I never bluff into 3 low card boards, 8 or under, obviously. So if you know, I preach opening with high rundown hands. You know, if if the flop is 3, 4, 6, your bluff's not going to be that successful, because the most likely hand that somebody's going to call you with will have an ace 2, something like that. So your bluffs aren't going to be as successful with a low, low, low board. Although, if you do play a lot of high hands for raises as well as the low hands, you'll be able to try to represent this, but most likely somebody that's in the hand that called your raise is going to have this. The best bluffing situations look something like, I just put an example. This is by far the most obvious situation to bluff in. Let's say we raise pre-flop with the ace 3 5 queen and we get a caller, and the flop's 3 4 jack. I'm sorry, 4 6 jack with 2 hearts. We don't have any hearts. If we bet and get called, we're going to put the villain's range on, whether he has the nut low draw or the nut flush draw or both. If he has both, it'd probably behoove him of raising that flop. But say we bet and he calls and the turn's an offsuit king, so we're looking at 4 6 jack king. We bet and he calls, and the river's an offsuit 4, which pairs the board. Wonder what he has. LOL. It doesn't matter if he has the ace 2 or the flush draw. He's never calling this third barrel. If he had a set, he would have raised early in the hand to try to push you off the flush draw, low draw type hand. More than likely, he would probably raise on the turn when it's a blank, when it doesn't complete any of the draws. So he's never really going to have any type of hand that he can call you with. Even with a random 4, he may. I mean, the pot's going to be pretty big at that time. He'll there's a good chance that he'll call you with that random 4. Say he had ace 4. Probably can't let that go, but I've let it go a couple times in situations where I just feel like I'm beat. So he may end up doing it also. So this seems like a good example of the best bluffing situation I can think of. And also, good bluffing opportunity exists on rivers with pairing boards or boards that show a flush by the river, or if there's an ace or 2 counterfeiting someone's apparent low. And if you try to put somebody on a range of hands that include the low, you start to be able to figure out which way that somebody's going by their betting patterns. So you can put a lot of times you can put somebody on just a random nut low, or you can put them on the nut low, nut flush draw, things like that. So if you just have them on a nut low and the 2 comes out on the river, that's an excellent card to bluff. If an ace, it'll probably give him, it may give him 2 pair and a live 2 or something like that, where it wouldn't be the best situation to bluff. But a lot of times those counterfeiting cards, you can push somebody off a hand that may end up splitting with you, and you can take down the whole pot instead. Jay-Z comes in at number 3 with Big Pimpin'.
Big pimpin', baby.
And the number 3 PLO8 leak is calling flop bets with ace 2 and no high potential. We're down to the top 3 PLO8 leaks, and these are huge, especially this one. When we have ace 2 jack 10 and the flops 5 7 queen, check folding is not the sexy line, but it is the correct one. If it wasn't raised pre-flop, I don't know how I would have ace 2 jack 10 and it wouldn't be raised pre-flop. But if it's not raised pre-flop, you may be able to call a small bet in PLO8 with the nut low and no high to see if something, maybe a 9 will come on the turn. I guess that Nine or a king on the turn would obviously be a good card. King being the best, but if you check call, you're typically going to get back half if you're lucky, and most of the time you'll be quartered. So, I, it's, especially in sit and goes, it's extremely easy fold. In cash, when you're a little deeper in the potential for that king to come on the turn, or a jack or 10 or something like that, I may call if I'm a little deeper, but I'm definitely not being aggressive with it. I say I'm not being aggressive, but that's not to say that if I was checked to, typically I'd bet, but it may or may not be correct to bet, because if you're playing someone like me that will typically fold, if they don't have more than just the nut low, it may be correct to bet to try to get control of the hand in later streets. If you continuation bet on this type of flop, a lot of times you'll win on the flop, but it all comes down to pot control on later streets. So if you bet and somebody calls and the turn's 6 and they check to you, I'd probably check behind and call most river bets, unless I'm counterfeited, and that would be a good opportunity for someone to bluff into me. So if the flops 5-7 queen and the turn's a 6 and the river's a 2, I can't call if somebody bets into me, no matter what they have. So it's going back to the good bluffing opportunities. That would be a perfect situation. So, but a good reason to bet if you're check 2 is to control it in later on later streets. But if somebody bets this flop, I'm going to typically fold my bad ace 2s without pairs or straight draws or flush draws or anything like that. At number 2, Eminem, my name is. And the number 2 PL08 leak is sitting at a table with Predator. Table and seat selection. I'm not that cocky. Table and seat selection. We definitely want to sit at aggressive tables with high players per flop and big pots. That may be obvious. It's always important to sit behind the money. So if this is a 2-4 PL08 6-handed game, we generally would want the seat behind the larger stack, just so, and we would definitely buy in as deep as we could, because it would behoove us to sit behind somebody that has that stack rather than sit in front of them with shorter stacks in front of us. That may be obvious, but there is one critical number that I look at when I take a seat. And if you look at this copy of my HUD, the top line, the highlighted number, is the called preflop raise percent. Going around this table, you've got a 9, 23, 15, 42, and 50. I would have a hard time making money at this table if I had to sit right here, because my goal when I raise preflop is to be in position the remainder of the hand. So if I'm sitting here and the button's anywhere in this general vicinity, when I raise and these guys are calling 42 and 50% of the time, I'm not going to have position throughout the hand. Whereas if I sit where Papa's sitting and I raise, and Angry Fish is behind me at 9%, and that's a little deceiving because his 3-bet percentage is so high, but Des Grips is behind Angry Fish with 23. It would be much better to sit in this general vicinity than in this, and I cannot stress how important that is when playing at a cash game table. And preflop raise, obviously, we want to sit behind aggressive players to be able to play large pots with the positional advantage. Some people don't raise in PL08. Some people raise as high as 25% of hands. But like I said, call preflop raise. Most important statistic in table selection, we don't want them to sit behind us. One of the biggest money milkers at the table is when you raise pre-flop and you get called by players behind you, and you're out of position in a raise pot. Some people that have a high percentage can play very tricky post-flop. They'll be floating. They'll be betting out on high boards that are most likely to miss somebody that would raise pre-flop. Typical ranges are from 5 to 20%. And looking back at that HUD, 5 to 20% is common. Probably 10 to 25. 5 to 20 may be a little bit low in games right now. But you've got some outliers in red, and that's the number one thing I look at when I want to sit down. Fold to flop bet is another important statistic when I sit down, because I don't mind them to sit behind us at all, because it's not as hard to play out of position against these type of players, because they, people that fold to a higher percentage of flop bets are pretty much fit or fold players. They rarely float, and we'll be able to continuation bet a lot more and be successful even when we're out of position against these type of players. And the number one hip-hop song and PL08 leak of all time. Dre and Snoop, Nothing But a G Thing. Unanimous decision. And Overplaying Aces, unanimous decision. I did a video on Overplaying Aces. This concept's so important, I produced an entire video on it. In cash games, with my somewhat aggressive image, even I rarely raise from early position in 9-handed tables with aces. I will also rarely 3-bet even when I'm in position with aces. A lot of this has to do with stack sizes. If somebody opens that has 40, 50 big blinds, I'm going to 3-bet a lot of aces. But this is mostly dependent on image and stack size is why I do this. It's hard to play ace, 5, 8 out of position. I would rather trap somebody when I hit a monster than to open with it and then continuation bet and have somebody call, because the hands don't play that well against somebody who's willing to call a continuation bet. And I threw this into Overplaying Aces post-flop stuff. On flops like ace 4 6, when you have aces, can you control yourself? This is a flop that appears to be good. You're taught a lot of times to be strong and protect your nut hand, when all actuality, if somebody's willing to call, you're being free rolled huge, unless you have like ace 2-3 or ace 2-5, 3-5, things like that. Or so can you control yourself with this type of flop? If I bet and someone min raise me, I fold my aces here. There's no reason to continue on in a hand with somebody who's got the 2-3-5. So Overplaying Aces, calm down. Don't think that they're aces like they are in Hold'em. Try to get tricky with them, and don't turn your cards over by 3-betting with aces in middle position with a lot of deep players behind you who will call you with the implied odds to stack you. So that's the conclusion of the leak and hip hop video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them on the forum. If you're going to tease me for throwing in the hip hop songs, that's fine, but you'll probably agree that those are some of the best songs from my era, and I I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Mike's Predator 06 with Card Runners. Thank you very much.